Let's examine a number of challenges that we've had using Milestone Enterprise 6.5F. It's one thing we've saw numerous things as we were using it that were confusing to us, hit roadblocks, didn't expect, and wanted to share this with you so that you can sort of understand it and hopefully avoid sort of what we've experienced. So we're going to go ahead and connect now. We have the server here running here locally. One thing that we've seen here, now this is recording on a recorder setup, so we can slow it down, but it's definitely over and over again. We found it much slower to connect to Milestone and pull up Milestone executables than we've had with any other VMS, generally by a factor of 3 to 5 times as long. So this may be a little bit longer even than we normally experience, but this is fairly representative of the types of delays that we've seen. So first thing, we'll get into views. And so you'll see one of the things that these panes actually, let me go 100%, but even at 100%, you can see that as these panes are open, it hides panes lower down. So for PTZ control, if I want to use PTZ control, first I need to do things like closing audio, and I'll close the outputs, and I'll close the events to make sure that you can see all of the PTZ control pane. You'll see the same issue when you're doing browsing. There's many different panes that are available. So for instance, I wanted to go and export, right? Export is hidden, so I could then have to close time navigation, and you have to do this manually. So, and I'll show you the same thing here in the setup. If you're looking to change properties of a camera, and we'll go through this in the setup side, but things are hidden, so you need to be very sure that you're not hiding something in the pane. So we've had this issue over and over again where we couldn't find things because a pane was obscured, and it's become a frequent source of challenge. I mean, once you learn that these things are hidden, you can sort of resolve it, but it's not obvious or intuitive, at least to us. The second element here is that using cameras, so for instance, we have 4 cameras connected right now, but the cameras are not listed in a tree hierarchy. They're all set in terms of these layouts. So for instance, one will set up a layout, and so we have a number of layouts set here. You can go and add new layouts. So for instance here, this is a new view, so we can have a new, for instance, 2x2 view, and then we will be able to put cameras in. The downside here is that we can go here, we can grab cameras and put them in. The problem is if you don't put the cameras manually in, so for instance now we have this test view that we just created, but there's no other cameras that are being displayed here, and there's no camera tree hierarchy. So let's say your security operator just wants to see the front door. If the front door isn't in one of the views, or you can't find it in the view, the operator is basically locked out. And so for instance, we can go and right click and then pull up another camera. So we'll pull up, for instance, the Canon. But on these other panes that are full, even when I right click, you can't put any video feed up there. So it can be very confusing and difficult if the camera isn't already there. We've also seen when we add in new cameras, you need to go and manually add those new cameras to the view because they're not automatically added like you would see in a normal camera tree hierarchy. So those are some real specific challenges we've seen just getting started on the live side. So let's take a look at when cameras are disconnected. So here, a camera has been disconnected, and you'll see that it's frozen. And in the next few seconds, it should stop, say that it's recorded. And so right now, it's just locked up because we physically disconnected it. Let me switch to another camera. And so you see that's still recording. Let's go back to the Canon, which has been disconnected. And so the server has lost connection to the camera. One thing that we found confusing is that the last image is still there. So often you think, if you quickly look at it, you'll think, especially in a scene with low activity, you'll think basically that the camera is still recording and can cause basically confusion because the image is still there. The other element when a camera is disconnected, there's no way to force a reconnect like you can do in other VMS systems. And so that can be challenging as well. You're totally dependent on the Milestone system automatically reconnecting, and it's difficult to troubleshoot to bring it back online, especially in the live view context. Another element in live view that we found challenging is that when the server is running out of disk space, it will actually overlay a message on all the live video displays that the server is running out of disk space. This can become very frustrating for a live operator. Imagine you're a security guard monitoring, and you have this message continuously being displayed in all your video panes. It's certainly important that that you have disk space. It's probably not appropriate to throw it on the live screen for the operator to be sort of confused or frustrated, because there's really not much they can do. An email to the administrator seems to make sense, but this has certainly been a challenge whenever we've been running out of disk space. So let's say you have an instance where you want to take a snapshot because there's something important going on the scene. For instance, there might be a car accident here. Traditionally, you'd have a button that would let you save a snapshot. In Milestone 6.5F, you have a copy, and all that's available. So you can copy, and so for instance, you might be able to go to Paint then, and you could then paste this into Paint, but there's no way that it will save it directly as a JPEG or a bitmap for you, which is quite standard in most systems. And so if you're doing an investigation, you have to do this sort of, numerous times to get, 3, 5, 8 different snapshots. This can become frustrating, confusing. That's not available. And here we'll save it, but clearly a utility feature would be much more helpful to allow you to export those types of images. Let's transition to the Browse tab and take a look at investigations. So one of the things you'll see here is that the way to do sort of your traditional time-based search is in time navigation. So it's buried among a number of different panes. So first, that's the first thing you need to take note of. You can go ahead and put in a specific time. So for instance, you could say, I don't want 10:27, I want 9:27. We've jumped to 9:27. In terms of controlling to look for video, this can be confusing. This over here on the right-hand side is sort of the timeline view, so you can quickly scan through like this. One challenge is 2 hours or 1 hour is the minimum span that you can use. So if you're trying to fine-tune to see what happened within a few minutes, it's very difficult to use. It's not granular enough with this. There are 2 functionalities that are quite helpful for this, but they're kind of hidden. This is the course time adjustment and the find time adjustment. So if we want to just go faster by seconds or 3 seconds, 3x, 5x speed, we can do it this way by using these controls, but it's hard to figure out that those controls exist. There's some other elements. Sequences is Milestone's versions of motion events. So you may not guess that sequences is that. If you click Get Sequences, it will retrieve 20 sequences before and after the specified in time net. So it's taking a while to pull it up, but once this, if you, for instance, by default, the preview is checked on. So what happens is, like, you flash over it when you do this, and it can be a little bit sort of disruptive. You can turn the preview off, and then you can, for instance, click inside and double click here to, for instance, see the alarm. So that's sequences, and there's some challenging getting accustomed to that. Probably the biggest challenge we saw on the export side, when you do exports, for instance, there's no flagging in or flagging out, so you can't sort of right click on the timeline and say start the export here. What you can do is you can set the current time. So the current time right now is 10:20:08. You can click the set button to do it this way, and then for instance you can do a database export. One thing when you do a database export, the default is into the desktop. If you do an export twice in a row, it will erase the previous export, and there's no way for you to guess this until you basically lose your previous database export. And this is important if you're trying to send video to third parties. The other element that can be frustrating and also problematic for law enforcement is that, for instance, let's go ahead and export something a lot. Let's do 10:20:12, so let's just do 4 seconds. Let's go ahead and export it to the desktop. And when it does not wrap it into a self-enclosed executable. It will make a folder which has about 20 DLLs and a number of other files, and there's one which is the viewer file that you can use, which will allow you to bring it. But again, many operators will be confused about which file to click and won't be able to click on the right one. We'll pull other things up, and we've seen this as a challenge. So now that that's complete, let's go to our desktop. So we will see here, and this is called exported images. That's the default of what it puts it in. Here we have a number of them because we've done it over time, but you'll see here, this is where we're talking about the DLLs, and here's our viewer.executable, which is the one correct one to use, and you'll see here's our 4-second video clip. It defaults to start at the end of the clip. We can sort of scroll back to go to the beginning and then click play, but those are some challenges in terms of the export process. Finally, on the investigation side, one thing that we actually found was useful but then a little bit challenging to use. For instance, you can click on an image and draw a box. So let's say we want to zoom into this truck. So we'll go ahead and zoom into this truck, and we can click on the truck again and zoom in even tighter. To get back out, there's no way to get back out. If you have an external mouse with a scroll wheel, you can scroll out. Otherwise, what you need to do is get into the PTZ control pane and manually click the minus to get out there. You can get trapped. We've gotten trapped. We've talked to a few other people who are trapped in the same way. So if you have a mouse with a scroll wheel, you'll be fine. You'll scroll in and scroll out. If you don't, if you're using a laptop, for instance, you will have an issue getting back out. So transitioning to the administration side, I think the first difficulty that one may have is to understand that Milestone segments its administrative tools into 4 various sections. So you see here, this is the status, this is their general administrator, which is generally for camera/device configuration, and there's the image server administrator, which when we click on it will not come up because we already have the general administrator up. And then, of course, there's the utility, the icon on the bottom right-hand side that lets you pull up various tools, such as the administrator, and to start or stop the recording server. So that's the first thing, to understand sort of how things are basically distributed across various Milestone admin applications. Once you get into that, a couple things that you'll see here is that the status, make sure that that you right-click on here on the bottom and pull up the status, because that's really the only way to confirm status, is to pull up the Show System Status tool, which is quite helpful but hard to find unless you've been through training or have been using the system for some period of time. Similarly, Milestone depends on driver device pack, so the most recent version for our test is 4.6. To check which version of the device pack you're on, we've confirmed with Milestone that you actually need to go to the control panel and then go into the program section to view which version of the device pack. So there's no utility way, and that's quite important because, for instance, when you're dealing with a new camera may not be supported in 4.5, but it may be supported in 4.6. And this is an issue that we've seen in using sort of the more cutting-edge cameras, that you do need to be very clear which device pack that you're on. And if we scan lower, I think we'll find somewhere here that it will list the device pack that it is using. So that's an important one to scan there to be able to pick that up. So we'll see here that it's under Video Device Pack version 4.6. So that's a way to pull that up. That can be a little bit confusing when you're trying to troubleshoot and add in newer cameras. Here's a big one that we've seen. So for instance, let's say we want to go to the axis, and let's go in and look at the settings. The settings right now, so it's at 8, which is the default. We're going to put that to 30. Let's go for the full frame rate. We're going to click on OK. So now we click on OK, and we believe that the axis should be at 30 frames per second. So let's go over to our status and check, and you'll see that the axis is still saying about 7.3, so a little under 8. So it could be confusing. Why has an axis been reset to 30 frames per second? The administrator needs to be closed before these configurations are written to file to adjust the recording services. So now let's go ahead and close it. And once we close it, it will write it and make the changes. And so you'll see that it's grayed out momentarily, and now it comes back green, which means the service has been restarted. And so let's take a look at the axis. And so you'll see the axis is now at 23.6. So do make sure that anytime you make these changes to settings of the cameras, that you close out the administrator, because if you do not, even though you've clicked on OK, that does not mean they've been accepted and updated. It waits till you exit out of the administrator. So that's something we found a number of difficulty until we sort of figured out that you have to not only click OK, but exit out to save the changes. A number of different sort of very problematic and frustrating issues that we walked through. The final point about the administrator will be that you have to access it on the local server that it's running. So for instance, if you are on a laptop and you're trying to connect to the server, you're going to have to remote desktop or console in to the server itself. There is no administrator remote client that lets you connect and make these changes over the network in Enterprise 6.5F. Let's transition now and look at the image server administrator. So one thing that can be confusing is that some important administration functionalities cannot be done in this administrator. They need to be done in the image server administrator. If you try now to pull up the image server administrator, you'll see that it does not come up. First, you need to close the general administrator. We're going to close that, and now we'll bring up the image server administrator. So a couple of things here. Designating as master slash slave. If you're adding slaves, so for instance, if you're trying to have multiple recorders and treat them as one whole enterprise so that you can manage and view video from multiple servers, you'll have to go ahead and add the IP address and port. One thing that we found challenging, there's no way to confirm connectivity. And so it can be a little bit more difficult to troubleshoot because you're going back and forth to test out to make sure that the connection works. And that connection will be dependent on having users set up for each side. So for instance, when you have this user, we have a John as a basic user, you'll need to make sure that John, if you're using basic user authentication, is set up on each of the servers. So that's the other element that can be tricky to figure out there. Finally, if you go ahead and start to restrict user access, or restricting user access, for instance, says, I'll let someone see something live but not do investigations, etc. When you add in a new camera, by default, that camera is not authorized for users to see. So if you choose to restrict user access, every time you add a new camera in, you have to go into the new camera. So let's say there'll be a new camera here, camera Y from IQ and Vision, and you need to push it over to make sure that users can see it. Otherwise, it will be hidden from all users, which can again be a frustrating, confusing element. While this has been a long and winding explanation of various difficulties, we do think it's important for you to understand and be aware of these types of things. It took us over 50 hours to figure out these various things through support calls. Certainly one can read the documentation. There is a 300-page user guide, but a lot of these things basically are fragmented and not, at least to us and our experience using video management systems, intuitive and can cause challenges regardless if you have IT experience and probably even more challenging if you are a traditional security integrator. Thank you.